The courtroom is not a place for stories, it is a place for evidence. But sometimes the most dangerous evidence is hidden behind a smile, or in this case, a $5 parking ticket. Look at the man standing before Judge Boyd today. He looks like your neighbor, a simple man caught in a simple mistake. He thinks he's here to argue about a small fine. He thinks he can charm his way out of a minor inconvenience. But Judge Boyd doesn't see a parking violator. He sees a pattern. He sees a crack in the foundation of the law that this man has been exploiting for years. Today, the $5 ticket is just the bait. The trap is about to shut. Imagine walking into a courtroom, your chest puffed out, confident that the worst case scenario is losing a few dollars. That is the illusion of innocence. This defendant, Mr. Miller, walks up to the podium. He's holding a yellow slip of paper like it's a meaningless piece of trash. He's smiling. He's prepared a joke about how the parking meter was broken. But watch Judge Boyd's eyes. He isn't looking at the ticket. He's looking at the defendant's hands. He's looking at the way Miller avoids eye contact with the court clerk. In the world of Judge Boyd, there are no small cases. There are only small people trying to bypass big laws. Mr. Miller, Boyd begins, his voice like a cold blade cutting through the room's chatter. You're here for a $5 ticket. Most people would just pay it and move on. You decided to contest it. You decided to take the court's time. Why? Miller starts his performance. Your Honor, it's the principle. The sign was obscured by a tree. I shouldn't have to pay for the city's negligence. It sounds reasonable, doesn't it? To the untrained ear, Miller is a victim of a bureaucratic error. But Judge Boyd has spent 30 years decoding the language of liars. He notices a tiny detail on the ticket, a smudge, a digit that looks slightly altered. Most judges would ignore it. Judge Boyd leans forward. This is the moment the atmosphere in the room shifts from a routine hearing to a criminal investigation. The principal, Mr. Miller? Let's talk about principles. Boyd taps a folder on his desk. This folder wasn't supposed to be part of today's hearing. It contains Miller's history, not just his driving record, but his financial fingerprints. You see, the $5 ticket wasn't an accident. It was a test. Miller has been using obscured signs as a legal loophole to park illegally in high-stakes areas for months. But that's not the felony. The felony is what he did to the ticket before he brought it to court. He didn't just contest the ticket. He forged a city official's signature on a fake maintenance report to prove the sign was broken. He thought Judge Boyd wouldn't check. He thought he was smarter than the system. He brought a knife to a nuclear standoff. Mr. Miller, Boyd says, his voice dropping an octave, you came here today expecting to save $5. By the time I'm done, you'll be lucky if you don't lose 5 years of your life. The smile on Miller's face doesn't just fade, it evaporates. The illusion of innocence is shattered. The decoding has begun. Miller isn't a victim. He's a fraudster who got too comfortable. And in Judge Boyd's court, comfort is a luxury you cannot afford when you're lying to the bench. This isn't about parking anymore. This is about the integrity of the record. This is about the hidden fraud that Judge Boyd just dragged into the light. The transition from a simple misunderstanding to a criminal investigation happens in the blink of an eye. Mr. Miller is still leaning against the podium, a smug look on his face, waiting for Judge Boyd to dismiss the $5 fine. He believes he is playing a game where the stakes are lower than the price of a cup of coffee. But Judge Boyd is no longer looking at the parking violation. He is looking at the integrity of the document in his hand. In this courtroom, silence is a weapon. Boyd lets the quiet stretch until the air feels heavy, until Miller's confident posture begins to wilt. Mr. Miller, Boyd says, his voice deceptively soft. You provided a maintenance report from the Department of Transportation. You claim this report proves the no parking sign was removed for repair on the day of your citation. This is the foundation of your defense, correct? Miller nods eagerly. Yes, Your Honor. I went to the office, spoke to a clerk, and they gave me that copy. It's all official. This is the fatal error. Liars often add unnecessary details to make their stories feel authentic. Miller didn't just provide a document, he created a backstory for it. Judge Boyd picks up a magnifying glass, a tool he keeps not for poor vision, but for spotting poor character. He studies the signature at the bottom of the report, Officer D. Harrison. Officer Harrison, Boyd muses, a dedicated public servant. I've known David for 12 years. The problem, Mr. Miller, is that David Harrison retired 14 months ago. He moved to Florida. He hasn't signed a maintenance report in this city since the previous administration. The blood drains from Miller's face. The hidden fraud is no longer hidden. It's sitting on the judge's desk, glowing like a neon sign. This is where a $5 ticket becomes a felony. Forgery of a government document is not a parking dispute. It's an attack on the legal system itself. Judge Boyd leans in closer, his eyes locking onto Miller's. You didn't just park illegally. You went home, sat at your computer, researched a name, and used a software program to replicate a city seal. You thought the system was too busy to notice. You thought a $5 case was beneath the dignity of a deep background check. Miller tries to speak, but his voice is caught in his throat. The principle he claimed to defend has become his noose. Boyd continues, by submitting this forged document as evidence, you have committed perjury and tampering with public records. Do you understand the gravity of what you've just done? You've traded your freedom for the cost of a sandwich. The courtroom spectators are dead silent. They came to see a judge scold a bad driver. They are witnessing a man dismantle his own life in real time. Judge Boyd doesn't show anger. He shows a cold, clinical disappointment. He is decoding the fraudster's psychology, the arrogance of a man who believes the law is for other people and that rules are merely suggestions for the clever. I'm not sustaining the fine, Mr. Miller, Boyd says, and for a split second, Miller feels a spark of hope. I'm vacating the ticket because it's irrelevant now. We are moving directly to a criminal referral. Bailiff, please step forward. The sound of the bailiff's heavy boots on the floor is the final period at the end. The game is over. The $5 ticket was the spark, but the forgery is the fire that is about to consume Miller's future. Judge Boyd remains motionless, his gaze fixed on the man who thought he could outsmart the law. The room is thick with a realization that this was never about a parking spot. It was about an ego that believed it was invisible. Mr. Miller is no longer looking at the judge. He is looking at the floor, his hands trembling as the reality of a felony charge begins to sink in. But Judge Boyd isn't finished. He doesn't just want to punish the crime. He wants to dismantle the mindset that created it. You see, Mr. Miller, Boyd says, his voice echoing with a clinical precision. Fraud is rarely born from a single moment of desperation. It starts with a small success, a small lie that goes unnoticed. You didn't wake up one day and decide to forge a government seal. You started by testing the fences. You started by seeing if anyone was actually looking at the details. Judge Boyd leans back, the leather of his chair creaking in the silence. He begins to decode the psychology of the bait. He explains that Miller used the $5 ticket as a deliberate distraction. By focusing the court's attention on a trivial amount of money, Miller hoped the judge would be blinded by the insignificance of the case. It is a classic magician's trick. Create a loud noise in one hand so the audience doesn't see what the other hand is doing. Most people think criminals go for the big scores, Boyd continues, but the professional deceiver knows that the best place to hide a mountain of lies is under a grain of sand. You thought I would be too annoyed by a $5 dispute to look at the paperwork. You counted on my frustration to be your shield. You wanted me to just get it over with so you could walk away with a victory for your ego. This is the hidden fraud at its core. Miller hadn't just forged one document. As Judge Boyd reveals more from the folder on his desk, it becomes clear that this was a lifestyle. Miller had a digital folder on his personal computer, one the court investigators had flagged weeks ago during a separate audit, filled with templates for city notices, fake maintenance logs, and even scanned signatures of various officials. The $5 ticket was merely the latest iteration of a system Miller had perfected to avoid accountability. The arrogance of the fraudster is his ultimate downfall, Boyd notes, his eyes sharpening. You believed the system was a machine that could be fed garbage as long as it was wrapped in a yellow ticket. You didn't respect the court. You pitied it. You thought we were relics, too slow and too tired to catch a digital age lie. Miller's defense attorney tries to interject, claiming that this is an overreach for a traffic hearing. Judge Boyd cuts him off with a single raised hand. Counsel, your client didn't bring a traffic dispute into my courtroom. He brought a felony. He brought an insult to the bench. When you lie to the court using the stolen authority of an officer like David Harrison, you aren't just breaking a rule, you are trying to poison the blood of justice. The trap has now fully closed. Miller came in to save $5, but he provided the court with the very evidence needed to link him to a much larger web of deceit. He thought he was the hunter, using a $5 bait to mock the system. He never realized that Judge Boyd had been waiting for him to step into the light. The silence in the courtroom is no longer one of anticipation, it is a silence of weight. Mr. Miller is physically smaller now, his shoulders hunched, his eyes darting toward the exit, as if searching for a reality where he isn't a suspected felon. Judge Boyd leans forward, resting his chin on his interlaced fingers. This is the stage of the escalation, where a minor traffic discrepancy is woven into a much larger tapestry of criminal intent. Mr. Miller, Boyd says, his tone shifting from clinical to piercing. In your haste to save $5, you left a digital trail that stretches back nearly 3 years. You see, when you submitted that forged document with Officer Harrison's name, my staff didn't just look at this case. We ran a cross-reference on every contested ticket you've brought to this building since 2022. Do you want to know what we found? Miller doesn't answer. He can't. Judge Boyd continues. We found 12 separate instances where you used the exact same obscured sign defense. In 9 of those cases, you provided documentation that, upon closer inspection today, bears the same digital artifacts as the forgery on my desk. You didn't just lie once. You turned this courtroom into a revolving door for your own personal fraud scheme. This is the hidden fraud fully exposed. Judge Boyd is decoding the serial deceiver archetype, the individual who believes that because they weren't caught the first time, they are invincible. Miller had become so comfortable with his deception that he became sloppy. He reused the same templates, the same fake seals, and most importantly, the same retiree's name, thinking that the high volume of cases in a city court would act as a camouflage. You treated justice as a subscription service you could hack, Boyd remarks coldly. You thought that by staying in the low-stakes zone of parking tickets, you were safe from the high-stakes consequences of the law. But the law is not a game of amounts. It is a game of truth. Whether it is $5 or $5 million, the moment you attempt to corrupt the record, you have crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. Judge Boyd turns to the court reporter. Ensure that the district attorney's office receives the full audit of Mr. Miller's filings. We are no longer discussing a parking citation. We are discussing a systematic campaign of fraud, forgery, and obstruction of justice. He then looks back at Miller, whose defense attorney is now whispering frantically in his ear. Your counsel is likely telling you to remain silent, Mr. Miller. That is wise. But your silence now cannot erase the loud, digital footprints you've left across this city's legal archives. You didn't just fail to pay for a parking spot, you attempted to steal the credibility of the court. The escalation is complete. The dots have been connected, forming a picture of a man who mistook a judge's patience for a judge's ignorance. Judge Boyd has transformed a $5 ticket into a masterclass on why there is no such thing as a small lie in a house of law. The energy in the courtroom shifts from investigation to execution. Judge Boyd sits upright, his presence filling the space with the absolute weight of judicial finality. Mr. Miller is no longer a defendant in a traffic case. He is a man standing on the edge of a precipice. The $5 ticket, once a shield for his arrogance, has finally transformed into the hammer that will shatter his freedom. Mr. Miller, Boyd begins, his voice resonant and unforgiving. This court finds that the evidence you submitted was not merely an error, but a deliberate act of criminal forgery. You did not just park where you weren't supposed to. You attempted to rewrite the laws of this city to suit your convenience. In doing so, you have committed a direct assault on the integrity of this bench. Judge Boyd picks up a heavy, leather-bound book of statutes, the physical manifestation of the rules Miller thought he could ignore. Under State Penal Code Section 470, the forgery of a government seal or the signature of a public official is a felony. Under Section 118, providing false testimony and forged evidence under oath constitutes perjury in the first degree. These are not administrative fees, Mr. Miller. These are crimes that carry prison time. The legal hammer falls with a precision that leaves no room for negotiation. Judge Boyd outlines the transition of the case. He explains that while the parking fine is dismissed, it is replaced by a criminal referral that includes 3 counts of forgery, 2 counts of perjury, and 1 count of tampering with public records. The stakes have escalated from a few dollars to a potential sentence of 3 to 5 years in a state penitentiary. Accountability is not a suggestion, Boyd remarks, his eyes fixed on Miller's pale face. You believed that because you were smart enough to use software and templates, you were above the consequences that ordinary citizens face. You viewed the law as a hurdle to be cleared rather than a boundary to be respected. Today, that boundary has caught up with you. Miller's attorney attempts one last plea for leniency, citing his client's lack of a prior criminal record. Boyd's response is swift and clinical. Counsel, the lack of a record is not proof of innocence. In this case, it is merely proof that your client was successful in his previous deceptions. A man who forges a city official's signature for a $5 ticket is a man who believes there is no lie too big or too small for his benefit. This court will not reward a career of hidden fraud with a slap on the wrist. Judge Boyd then turns to the bailiff. The defendant is to be remanded into custody immediately pending a formal arraignment on the felony charges. The hidden fraud ends here. This courtroom is closed for the day, but for you, Mr. Miller, the real trial has just begun. The sound of the gavel striking the block echoes like a gunshot. It is the finality of a system that has been tested and has proven to be unyielding. Miller is led away, not because of where he parked, but because of who he chose to be when he walked into the light of the court. Justice does not end when the gavel strikes the block. It truly begins when the noise of the courtroom fades and the consequences start to consume the offender's life. Judge Boyd sits back, watching Mr. Miller being led away in restraints. This is the aftermath, the stage where we decode the true cost of a $5 lie. Many people watching this will think I am being harsh, Boyd says, addressing the near-empty courtroom with a voice that feels like a heavy moral weight. They will say, it was just a parking ticket, but they fail to see the rot beneath the surface. When you lie to a judge, you aren't just trying to save money. You are telling every honest citizen that their integrity is worthless and that the system can be manipulated by anyone with a printer and a lack of conscience. The cost for Miller is not just a fine. Because this is now a felony charge, the life Miller once knew has effectively ended. Judge Boyd decodes this chain reaction. A felony conviction for forging government documents means Miller loses his right to vote, his right to own a firearm, and most importantly, his future employability. No financial firm or reputable organization will hire a man convicted of defrauding the judicial system. The digital age has a long memory, Boyd notes coldly. Every background check for the rest of his life will scream forgery. He traded his career, his reputation, and his freedom for the ego-driven satisfaction of beating a $5 citation. This is the true anatomy of a bad decision. Judge Boyd dismantles another bitter truth, the betrayal of trust. Miller used the reputation of a retired officer like David Harrison as a shield for his deceit. This is a direct insult to those who have spent their lives serving justice. By dragging an honest man's name into his own mud, Miller has severed any chance of receiving leniency from the court. In my courtroom, mercy is reserved for the mistaken, not the calculating, Boyd declares. Mr. Miller wasn't a man who made a mistake. He was a man who built a factory of lies and expected the court to be his best customer. Today, the bill came due, and the interest on a $5 lie has proven to be bankrupting. This aftermath serves as a high-priced warning to anyone who believes there is such a thing as a small lie before the bench. Judge Boyd has proven that when you challenge the truth, the price is always paid in freedom and honor things that no amount of money can ever buy back. The removal of Mr. Miller from the courtroom does not signal the end of the day's significance. Judge Boyd remains on the bench, his expression unyielding as he looks toward the remaining gallery. This is the stage of the ripple effect. In the world of high-stakes justice, one man's attempt to hack the system creates waves that threaten the stability of every other case. Judge Boyd knows that if he allows a $5 forgery to slide, he invites a tidal wave of corruption that could drown the city's legal archives. The integrity of this bench is not a static thing, Boyd declares. his voice cutting through the lingering tension. It is something that must be fought for in every single hearing. When Mr. Miller walked in here with a forged document, he wasn't just lying to me, he was attempting to contaminate the very well of truth that we all rely on. If the court cannot trust the documents presented to it, then the law becomes nothing more than a suggestion. Judge Boyd begins to decode the institutional damage caused by hidden fraud. He explains that Miller's actions forced the court to divert precious resources away from genuine cases. Every minute spent verifying a fake maintenance report is a minute taken away from a victim seeking real justice. The ripple effect extends to the administrative level, where audits must now be conducted on thousands of previous filings to ensure that Miller or others like him haven't successfully poisoned the record before. Accountability is the only antidote to this rot, Boyd continues. By making an example of this small case, we send a message to the digital counterfeiters and the ego-driven fraudsters. The court sees you. We are not a relic of the past. We are a shield for the present. We use the same digital tools you use to deceive, but we use them to protect the truth. The restoration of the bench's integrity requires a cold, clinical transparency. Judge Boyd announces that he will be implementing a new verification protocol for all third-party maintenance reports submitted as evidence. Miller's clever scheme has inadvertently led to a tightening of the net. The loophole he tried to exploit has now been welded shut for everyone else. You cannot build a life on a foundation of sand, Boyd concludes, looking at the empty space where Miller once stood. And you certainly cannot build a defense on a foundation of forgery. The bench remains standing because it is rooted in the bedrock of reality. Those who choose to live in a fantasy of their own making will eventually find themselves crushed by the weight of the real world. With this final analysis of the ripple effect, Judge Boyd prepares the room for the next case. The hidden fraud has been purged, and the authority of the court has been reaffirmed not through anger, but through the relentless application of the law. This marks the end of a journey that began with a trivial traffic violation and concluded with a shocking criminal conviction. Judge Boyd sits upright, his gaze sweeping across the room like a final warning. He is not merely delivering a verdict for an individual, he is setting a standard for the community. This is the closing verdict, the stage where the true power of truth is affirmed and painful lessons are etched into history. Justice is often depicted as blind, Boyd begins, his voice dropping to a low, powerful resonance. But in this courtroom, justice has 20/20 vision. Mr. Miller believed that the scale of the crime determined the level of scrutiny. He was wrong. The law does not care about the $5. The law cares about the lie. Every time a person like Mr. Miller attempts to manufacture his own truth, he chips away at the foundation of our civilization. Judge Boyd decodes the final lesson on power and truth. He explains that real power does not reside in the judge's gavel or the black robe, but in the absolute trust of the people in the accuracy of judicial records. When Miller forged a signature, he was attempting to steal that power to serve his own petty ego. To anyone sitting in this gallery or watching these proceedings, Boyd continues, let this be your masterclass in accountability. There is no shortcut to escaping a mistake. When you park illegally, you pay the fine and you retain your honor. When you forge a document to save that fine, you lose your freedom and you become a ward of the state. The exchange rate for dishonesty is always too high. Judge Boyd strikes the gavel one last time. The sharp, dry sound marks the end of a fraudulent scheme dragged into the light. He stands up, leaving a final message for those who believe they can hack the system. You may find a loophole in a sign and you may find a glitch in a meter, but you will never find a loophole in the truth. Court is adjourned. Concludes with the image of Judge Boyd leaving the bench, leaving behind a room filled with deep reflection. The case of the $5 parking ticket has become a legend of judicial insight. It reminds us that under the watch of someone like Judge Boyd, every hidden fraud will eventually be exposed before the light of justice.